So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Geo Dialogue, which is part of the Geo Dialogue series. And this one is specifically on online access and the related Geo principle. I will share my screen for the introduction, and I will present myself during the introduction. So welcome to the Data Sharing and Data Management Principles Dialogue series, which is organized by the Geo Data Working Group. So please, just some house rules to begin. Mute your microphones if you are not speaking, and you can intervene raising your hand under the reaction, and you wait for the moderator to give you the floor. You have a raised hand under reactions in the panel, in the control panel. And I hope you will enjoy this series. So what is the Geo Dialogue series? The Geo Data Sharing and Management principles that have been defined by Geo since 2015 need to be advocated. They are people know what the name, they usually know more or less what they talk about, but they have sometimes only heard about them, and they do not always know all the detail of all the principles, especially the last ones. So the Geo Data Working Group has decided to make a dialogue series to raise awareness about these principles and the expected benefits. And the idea is to present the principles on the theoretical approach, and then to bring some success stories to highlight different aspects of these principles. So these dialogues will be recorded and they will be published on the Geo website, and they will be made available for publication to other communities. And the idea is to engage now with the community. Why? To engage more, because the people providing, the data providers providing remote sensing data know these principles and they implement them. But we want to engage more with people providing in situ data. And this is a much more fragmented community, and we need to mainstream this knowledge. So the idea of these dialogues is to bring a perspective on different aspects, emphasizing in situ, but also law and policy, the licenses and other frameworks, and also to provide some Geo work program examples. These are the different principles for the data management principles. And so, as said before, we will present the theory and some examples and try to bring some highlight on the fair, care and trust principles. So this is the roadmap of the dialogues. We already had a dialogue about the data lifecycle, the data sharing principles, the discoverability, and today the focus will be on online accessibility here, the data management principle number 2. The next dialogues will be each Monday. We have a dialogue, always at the same time from 4 to 5:30 CEST. And of course, you are very welcome to attend any of the dialogue you're interested in. The Geo data sharing principles are reminded here on this slide, and it will be provided for into the presentation. These are because we said that we were going to talk about all these principles. Maybe you don't know them in detail. So these are all the principles. And today we will focus on this one that will be presented by Joanne more in detail. So my name is Marie-Françoise Boidreau. I'm a director, Europe director with the OGC Innovation Program. And I have a focus on initiative related to Earth observation. I have been working with the French Weather Service for more than 30 years, and I joined OGC in 2017. And I work I'm involved in several initiatives related to Geo. I'm part of the Geo program board, and I have been involved in NextGeo's project, European project, and I'm now involved in eShape and InCase project, facilitating the access to in situ. All my projects are connected with Geo somehow, and I'm involved in the Geo program board, I said, and also I have been involved in the expert advisory group, Geos Evolved, and so on. I co-organize this dialogue series with Bente Lilia B. She has been a member of the GEO community since 2004, and then with the research director of the Norwegian Mapping Authority. She has been involved with GEO since a very long time. Several projects also related to GEOS, NextGeos, the GeoNexios community. So you can see that she has a long experience in understanding the Earth observation information system and the GEO organization. So you can bring your question anytime into the chat, and we will make some polls during the presentation so we can engage more and know better what are your needs and your feedback about the presentation and the brainstorming we try to stimulate here. So online access, the program today, after my introduction that I am finishing here, will be the introduction by John Mazot on this geodata management principle. Then we will have a presentation from Gilberto Camara. So moving from principles to practice in Earth observation data management. Then a presentation from Thanasis Drivas from the National Observatory from Athens on the umbrella access point for Copernicus and geodata. A presentation from Christoph Wohner from the Environment Agency Austria on the DAMES-SDR, that is a database, a data repository for in situ for biodiversity and ecosystems, and a presentation about the CREA principles by James Ratlin. Joan Mazot, our first speaker, is a principal investigator from CREAF and the University of Barcelona. He's leading a specialized group on geospatial interoperability. I will let you read his resume here. He has an amazing experience in geospatial data and standards. He's very engaged in OGC too. And I let you the floor, Joan, for your introduction.
All right, so I will share my screen. So that's the data management principle number 2. It says online access, but when I was just sitting here, I realized that online access is what we are doing now. So I added 2 data to make it clear. Well, those are different icons, but the list is exactly the same. And we are talking about the accessibility of data. Marie-Françoise already presented that text, but I couldn't even read it because it was so fast. So let's read it again. Data will be accessible via online services, including at minimum direct download, but preferably user customizable service such as access, visualization, and analysis. And here it gives us a clue that there are several things that you can do to give access to the data that are diverse. So maybe we can analyze them better. On one hand, we have the download. That's, you know, this typical text underline that we are so used in the web. It assumes that there is a good processing infrastructure in-house. You just click on a file, you get it, and that's it. Maybe that's complemented by some kind of a query-based spatial, thematic, or temporal, or maybe it's even complemented by an ordering service if for some reason the actual file is not available at this moment, but could be produced or put it on a more fast archive afterwards. On services for visualization, they are of course only useful for exploration, for exploratory work. The data that is really shown in the computer of the user is just a small fragment or a simplification. And here we are talking about maps, tiles, or graphics. On the other extreme, we have the processing services. They give access to the data, but not in the usual sense. You are not going to download the data. On the contrary, you are going to process the data in a remote facility that is closer to the data, and only the final results are downloadable. If it is developed correctly, it becomes equivalent to the first approach somehow. We have several alternatives in terms of mechanisms and standards, and the panorama is getting populated because some of these alternatives are relatively new. On one hand, we have these files to download. That's very simple, maybe a list of geotiffs or whatever other format you want. Then we have the traditional geospatial services that has been around for maybe almost 20 years. We are talking about the web map services, web feature service, coverage services, processing service, etc. More recently, the web has teach us a new way of developing services more based on the concept of resources and adding to those resources the necessary tools to actually operate with them. And this is what it's called the API, more or less, no? And in particular, the OGC has embraced the web APIs by providing from 2 years, I believe now, the OGC API features, and more recently others like the OGC API tiles that is in the pipeline for publication. We also have data cubes. That's a way to structure the information in a multidimensional space, not only with the spatial components, but also with temporal, band components or frequency, and maybe even other dimensions, of course, elevation too. They can be based on arrays, formats that are more designed for data, scientific data arrays like NextCDF or HDF file or something like that, and are accessible by programming languages like Python, interesting user interfaces like Jupyter Notebooks, Docker containers, whatever. Recently, we also have another extension, or if you want, of the files to download, and this is where you have access, asynchronous access to parts of the information by using a small characteristic of the HTTP protocol that was kind of forgotten. And this is the strategy used in the cloud optimized GeoTIFF and other formats that are emerging like SAR and something for vector data. This is called GeoParquet. Then we have the time series of observations, and this matches with this in situ data focus that Marie-Françoise was emphasizing at the beginning. And in the past, we had the traditional geospatial services like sensor observing system. Now we are transitioning into something more connected to the web APIs, that's the Sensor Things API. And let's not forget that there is yet another way of doing that, and that's the linked data approach, where resources are expressed in RDF and related together in these triples and accessed by GeoSparker language or expressed recently in JSON LD. So the document explains more or less all that. I'm talking about the data management principle revised guideline that was included in the call for this and the other dialogue series, but also add some recommendations, and the recommendations are quite straightforward. Use a simple architecture, so don't get complicated. So maybe the new OGC web APIs or the approach based on cloud optimized GeoTIFF distribution are now preferable because of the simplistic architecture that brings more users into play. Use of standards preventing the vendor locked in, and using recognized common procedures and easy to find tools, and well-known formats. So formats that are, for instance, recognized by the GEDAL OGR libraries in a way that then are easily adaptable to your software. Let me just say that when we do that, we shouldn't forget that apart from giving those services from the server provider point of view, we also need to think on our users and give them the client-side tools to access the information. So apart from, you know, setting up a geo server or a geo processing or a S3 bucket or an open data cube, you also need to give your users with, I don't know, map tools like Leaflet or OpenLayers, with Jupyter notebooks, with some kind of a Coq Explorer, Cloud Imaginative Explorer, or whatever, to actually connect with your users in an easy way. And more or less that's it as a start. I'm definitely interested in the examples that are going to follow, and they are going to give us some details and some good practices on how to do this. And Marie-Françoise will tell us who is next, or maybe Bente.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
don't know. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I think this was a very clear introduction. And we have seen the importance of standards. We have seen that there are several standards. Not of them, they are not always competing sometimes, but because they can bring different approaches. We have seen that you have servers, you have client. Accessibility is a terminology which is oriented from the user side. So this is very important. And I will give the floor now to Gilberto Camara, because what we want to do here is to make the link between the theory and the practice. So I don't know if you have any question on the theory, but maybe this can come in the discussion after presenting some success stories about the implementation and the practice. So Gilberto Camara is a researcher in geoinformatics. He has a lot of experience in GIS, not only on the theoretical part, but on the implementation. Is a very practical approach person, and this is why he's perfect for a success story here. Is internationally recognized for promoting free access for geospatial data. Everyone knows him because he has been the director of INP, but also the director of GEO. And I will let you the floor, Gilberto, to present your experience.
Thank you very much, Marie-Françoise. A simple question, how much time do I have? So I have to...
The presentations are 7 minutes. We will push some polls during the presentations to stimulate the discussion. And the idea is really to focus on the discussion, so we keep some time for that.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me share my screen. So actually, first of all, thank you very much, Marie-Françoise, for inviting me. You know, it's a well-known fact that one learns a lot after leaving the government. That's what we say in Brazil. It's a little bit dark here, but okay. So, and I learned a lot about GEO after leaving the Secretariat, or at least I can say some things now that I could not as a Secretariat Director. So, and of course, that's, if you invited me, you want some provocation, so let's do for it. The obvious things, you know, I'm not going to go into detail. The fact that we have data available, and most of the data that we're talking about in terms of space is available in cloud platforms, and that's where the data is there now. And including collections, for example, Landsat, the full Landsat collection is available on Google, on Amazon, on Microsoft, so as the Sentinel-2 collection 1 and 2. Now, what's the practice? I mean, you talk about a lot of things. The practice is the real deal. If you are developing something right now, you're going to use Stack. Stack is not a standard yet, but is a de facto common format which everyone in the game who is working with data is using. And then it provides a way to access different data sets in a very united way. And that's really very good. And I urge you to learn more about Stack because it really works very nicely in terms of the full catalogs. And the nice thing about it is there are more and more Stack extensions. So there's a new Stack extension for training data, which is very, very nice. And it's being championed by Radiant Earth. And that is also a very important point There's another stack extension for data cubes, which helps you a lot. And as Juan Mazo said, nowadays you can count at the access level with the efficient partnership of GDAO and COG, which solves most of the access problems. So in practice, this allows people, for example, I develop a package for satellite image time series analysis, which runs nicely in these platforms, Amazon, Microsoft, CIPO, Brazil Data Cube, Digital Earth Africa. And the code runs nicely because we use TAC. And it really works, and you don't have to worry about how actually Microsoft or Amazon differentiate in how they handle the data. The same code runs in all platforms, and therefore you can do a lot of very useful things with the data. Now, going back to what we've been discussing, what we have now an emergence of certain trends that have been mentioned by Juan and Marie-Françoise and also Bente, is the issues of principles. And they include, of course, the most well-known immediately would be the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But I know that you, Bente, and you, Marie-Françoise, and Juan, are concerned about, let's say, different principles that have emerged. I've been seeing you mention 3 principles: the FAIR principles, the CARE principles, and the trust principles. I'm going to argue that they are different, especially considering what is the constituencies that have been started with them and which constituencies have proposed them. And I think it's fair to argue that FAIR principles have been argued for by scientists. The CARE principles came out of concerns, and which are very important concerns from indigenous community. And now trust principles are geared towards the needs of user communities. Now, I know that you have been doing a huge amount of interest and effort in trying to map these principles to the geodata management principles. And what I came here to say, and you know me, please don't take me there, I'm going to say, forget it. In fact, I don't think it's worth the effort. My problem is I think that geo-management principles have outlived their usability. One people can say they're comprehensive. I'm going to say it's complicated. There are so many that in practice they're not implementable. And I'm willing to give my right finger to someone who has actually implemented all of the principles and can pass a check test in all of the principles. I think they're too complicated. They have been drawn from like a laundry list or wish list of everything you could ask for. They're not realistic. And furthermore, they don't speak outside this video conference or the Geneva rooms. They don't make sense to everyone. You don't have anyone else for them. So I can say now what I could not as Geosecretary Director. Dump this, forget it. Forget it. Talk in this is Esperanto, or this is Yiddish, this is like written in Estonian. I mean, no one understands it. Or Finnish, no one understands it. Speak in a language that people can understand. Adopt the FAIR and CARE principles, which are met by expectations of our constituencies. We have a strong indigenous community constituency and a strong scientist constituency. And go for the logic of be fair with care. My argument is, forget everything else. Adopt principles which are understood by communities which we have. We are part of them. I'm part of the scientific community, for example. It's much easier to say we promote FAIR, we promote CARE. And then from there on, a dialogue becomes much easier. So my point is the data management principles are a hindrance to Geo now. They're not serving Geo, they're making us spend a lot of time in writing text in Estonian or Esperanto, and no one's read these texts outside us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gilberto. It's always nice to invite Gilberto for a brainstorming because it stimulates the discussion. And I fully disagree on that at the moment. I'm open to discussion, of course, and I like to evolve. So we have presented some mapping between the FAIR principles and the GEO principles during the first dialogue, Gilberto, and this can be interesting to discuss, and especially the mapping. And I think that the GEO principles go further into the implementation, and specifically for the preservation and curation. The FAIR principles are much more fuzzy, and so this is something where we can discuss. But is there any question or reaction from the audience on the presentation from Gilberto? Chris?
Yeah, just my discussion, and we would also, I would also in our email conversation, of course. So I just to provide a text of 60 pages. So it's not the best way to communicate attractive content, I would say. So. But in the end, if you go to the FAIR principles, so they're quite simple and almost quite sexy. But what is behind the FAIR principle and all the works and especially what we are doing now for the European Open Science Cloud, there's a lot of context regarding the FAIR principle, how to govern these principles, and so on. So it's I agree that we have to change also not to provide 60 pages on technical guidelines or at least such recommendations. But I'm in this sense, and also regarding the history, so it would be also, yeah, I think can be here a nice discussion within the process, how to evolve the principle at all. Thank you.
Bento?
Yes, very short. Thank you very much, Gilberto. Always entertaining to communicate with you. First, I wrote clarification in the chat, namely that we don't, when we are trying to map GEO principles with FAIR, care, and trust, the result was actually that there are, to a large extent, complementary. So that's, they are not competing, they are complementary. And a second comment is that, yes, you know, even the FAIR and care seems simple. We all know that the devil is in the details. So even if you have a simple description of it, when you're actually going to do it, it might require some more help and guidance. So let's see what we can make out of a dialogue around this.
Joanne? Well, provocation works to involve the audience.
Yes, of course it does.
I have to say that I agree with Gilberto in some points, in particular that FAIR has done much more well done dissemination and communication. They are famous. Everybody knows what it is, and they are simple. It is also true that the data management principles cover aspects that are not problems perceived today, like the preservation of the information and the need for curation of information. When our cartographic institute started to distribute digital products, they care only about the very last orthophotographic product, for instance, and they forgot about all the rest. And with time, we learned that preserving a time series is important. And maybe FAIR doesn't say that, but that doesn't mean it's not true. So maybe we could divide the data management principles in something that is more direct and obvious, and some others that are more, in the long run, but they are all relevant, I believe.
Marie-Françoise, can I respond or should I wait?
No, you can respond. Go.
My point is simple. It's like when I have students here in Brazil and they write good papers and they want those papers to be shared with the community. What good does it mean if they're very good papers but written in Portuguese? No one reads them. Communication, if we're talking in a global organization, if you want people to share things with you, to adopt principles and to share visions, you cannot ignore what is done by the community at large. You cannot live in a bubble. The data management principles were written 10 years ago, before FAIR came about, before CARE came about. And they were a bubble. They were written from the perspective of space agents who talk about curation, preservation, the guys that sit on the vaults in ESA or USGS. This is not, or Reading at ECMWF, this is not the case today. They don't appeal if you read those documents. A normal person would stop at page 3, a persistent person stops in the end. I had to go to all the pages just because I was director. But that was it. It was my obligation to look at all the documents in full. But people get tired of things that they look in the document, they say, this is outside my scope, this is outside the capacities of my organization, this is not what I can do. But I still want to share within principles. So I say, why don't I adopt the FAIR principles and go for it? It is unreal to continue to stick to something that does not have any dialogue with the world at large. Sorry.
Well, we do not reject, I don't think GEO is rejecting the FAIR principle. And this is why we have announced this dialogue series, making the mapping with the FAIR principle. We acknowledge that the FAIR principles are here. We acknowledge that they cover a broader scope than just Earth observation. We acknowledge that the FAIR terminology is very easy to remember and to communicate the marketing around the FAIR word is much more easier than with the GEO principles. But we still think that the detail of the GEO principle bring better insight, for instance, for the reusability. FAIR, the F maps very much with the discovery, the first principle. The A access maps very well with the I, with the second principle from FAIR, the accessibility. But then interoperability, which is what you wanted to emphasize. By the way, I have published a poll that was suggested more or less by Gilberto to see if GEO should move from these principles to something which is more focusing on the interoperability, which is something that Gilberto has emphasized into his presentation with interoperability through the stack standard. But then the reusability is more fuzzy, I think, than all the things which are detailed into the GEO principles with the usability, the quality, the metadata, the curation, and this goes in much more detail in the implementation than they are of the FAIR. So this is, I think, where GEO principles still bring something in addition to the FAIR that needs to be more detailed on that.
I'm going to argue, Marie-Françoise, that actually the FAIR principles are much better on reusability than the data management principles.
Okay.
Reusability in our world, is not the data. It's the data plus the code plus the algorithm. There's no reusability by only sharing data. Data does not speak. It does not have this magic purport yet. Maybe someday AGI will come and data will speak, but data does not speak. You need an algorithm for that. There's no reusability based on data only.
Well, okay.
So basically, reusability has to do with sharing the method, sharing the algorithms, going full open science. And the data management principles talk as if data would speak. They're complete. I mean, what is the good of translating the Bible in whatever, strange language that no one reads? That's what you're trying to do.
So you are completely right that we are moving more and more because of the big data, which cannot be downloaded. We are moving towards, and OGC is pushing that very much, to the data access through application and processes with the data interface, where you push the process near the data because you cannot download the data anymore. So we are focusing much more on sharing the processes. Maybe we will come back to that later, but I think we have to go further into the presentations. If not, we will not be able to discuss with all our speakers. So the next presentation, apologies, I have to find again. So the next presentation will be, do you see my screen? Do I share my screen or not?
No, you don't.
You're not sharing now.
Okay, apologies about that. Let me find the Zoom application to share my screen. Okay. So the next presentation would be given by Thanasis Drivas from the National Observatory of Athens. And he will talk about the umbrella access point for Copernicus and geodata, tools and roadmap to efficient and effortless geospatial data access. And again, accessibility is in both principle, in FAIR and geo, so there is no conflict at all on that. Okay, thank you, Thanasis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but
Great.
not in full screen, not in presentation mode. Okay, perfect.
So this presentation focuses on the umbrella access point application for Copernicus geodata, and it is considered to be an application on simplifying the discovery of metadata, of Sentinel metadata, and not only Sentinel. We are going to see the second version of application that it's also connected to additional data sets. But before we move to the current version, let's see how it started. And it started by the first version, it's called Umbrella Sentinel Access Point. And the idea behind this development has to do with the difficulty of searching of Sentinel data. It is often a complicated process due to several reasons, such as the global coverage. Not all the hubs cover entirely the whole, the mission availability. Not all the hubs provide us with all the products, or with the products from all the missions, to the maintenance, because many hubs, a series of hubs, can be offline, so users cannot access them. And of course, the download speed, both on intra level, depending on the request on its time, but also on the extra level, because many hubs does not have different download speeds, provide different download speeds. So we developed the Umbrella Sentinel Access Point, which ultimately gives a potential for linking different data hubs in order to provide global coverage into one single hub, to provide continuous availability, and of course to provide better performance on download products, because all the hubs are tested for integrity, availability, and download speed. So the users can access a single data hub in a transparent way, so to download efficiently their products. At the moment of speaking, Umbrella is connected to 10 connected hubs. Some of them are DOS-based, DHAS, and some others are non-DOS-based, such as the PEPs, for example. Moving to the second version of Umbrella, the idea here was started from the eSafe project. We have created a website, usage examples, training material, and scripts that have been prepared for the H2 end-to-end project in order to enable EuroGeo showcases in the context of this project, in order to access the Copernicus data. For example, the Umbrella has been utilized by the agricultural showcase in order to create a time series of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 products for phenology monitoring and yield prediction. Here is our website, and you can see a screenshot of a basic example of using the Umbrella API. It's part of it. And let's move to the next one. Within the scope of NextGeos and relying on NOAA's experience in model Sentinel hubs, the NOAA team has also developed a similar application, which is called the Sentinel Broker Hub. The biggest difference with the Umbrella is that the Sentinel Broker connects DHAS software only because the NextGeos is based on these hubs that are lying on the DOOS, because it's easy to synchronize and then extend the number of the connected hub very easily. So the biggest, in order to highlight the difference, Umbrella connects to both DOOS and no-DOOS APIs, and gives the most optimal source to download products from at any given time instance, whereas the Sentinel Broker Hub gives a list of these hubs in order to select the hub of your choice. But it's all DOOS based. What's the ongoing work? Now, currently, we are trying to create sophisticated queries in order to combine Sentinel metadata with metadata in order to allow targeted download to minimize the number of Sentinel products that a user can download based on additional parameters. For example, users have the potential now to define extra parameters such as the temperature and the precipitation, so to further filter the number of satellite images that are given as response. In addition, blending Copernicus and metadata infused feature spaces in order to support downstream services. This is the idea behind the current work. And let's see some use cases. For example, these functionalities that I mentioned before are currently extended so to encompass geospatial datasets. And this work is done in the context of IFL and GEOS application for climate change project and the GeoKernel initiative that's closely connected to this project, disseminating its output to the GeoKernel networks of stakeholders. So the role of GEOS portal and its provided dataset is revealed, and we can build climate change adaptation and mitigation applications. And as I said before, in that direction, Umbrella Sentinel Access Point is upgraded to Umbrella Access Point for Copernicus and Geo data. Here is a simple figure that reveals the architecture, a first layer of the architecture. Users can make queries and to our endpoint, API endpoints, and there's a series of backend processes that connects either to external APIs in order to identify and harvest metadata, or this metadata is already being downloaded and stored into a Geo server application. Thus, we can have also gridded and not gridded metadata coming from two sources, or the external sources or internal sources that have already been downloaded too. So this is the basic architecture for our application. The future work is strongly connected to is focusing on the connection of Umbrella to additional APIs that offer Meteo, not only Meteo, but we can also add some other geospatial data sets that meet our requirements, I mean for the architecture of our application, to increase the number of functionalities that the Umbrella app comes with by adding operators, so to make it user customizable, and of course to extend the response of Umbrella application by adding additional data as a response. For example, polygons that meet certain requirements in order the users that can clip instantly the satellite image they download. That's all from me. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Thanasius. Very interesting presentation where NOAA is trying to provide additional service above the access to the data with this capacity to select the best source of Sentinel data. Why? Because for remote sensing and for Sentinel, we have many sources now which are possible. So this is why it is possible to add new services. So I will share, well, first I will end the poll, this one, and I will first go back to the poll one and share the results, because to finish. So during, after the presentation from Gilberto, we had discussed the idea to keep on working on the data management principles, also develop best practices on interoperability for Earth observation, keep both of them, the two approaches, and so these are the results from the poll. We never know if the questions have been very clear to all, but my understanding is that people think that it would be interesting to work on best practices and keep both of them. So maybe it's a serial activity, and of course, this gives topics for discussion, as said into the chat by Joanne, for future GEO working groups. Considering the second poll, it was related to the presentation from Thanasius. Do you access the data directly from the data producer or via an intermediate access provider? What we understand from his presentation is that it is interesting to go through an intermediate access if he adds some services over the access to the data. It's not just a pure redistribution of the data or other. We had a comment in the chat from Janos saying that the second poll was tricky because the access to the data can be at several levels: administrative, permission agreements, etc., or application or network. And I agree with that. And the problem is that we cannot go into the detail of all the topics in 1 hour and a half, but I agree that the access has several layers of analysis. No problem with that. Okay, maybe we will go to the next. Well, is there any question from the audience here? I don't see any hand raised. No, maybe we will go to the next presentation. I have to share the introduction of the next speaker. So I hope you see my screen. Do I share my screen? I never know if
No, you
okay.
don't.
Sorry about that. I hope you have seen the results from the polls. Yes?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so it was shared. So the next speaker is Christoph Wohner, because we have always an active effort to talk about in situ, where the problems are completely different than for remote sensing. As said before, for Sentinel, we have several sources. For in situ, I will let Christoph explain why they have done the DAMES SDR and what is this specific effort that come from a community, because it's not so easy to find the in situ when you need it. I will stop sharing and give you the floor, Christoph.
All right, so I'm going to briefly talk about a system called DAMES SDR and how we implement geodata management principles. This is actually a two-part presentation. So today I'm going to talk about the accessibility aspects of the geodata management principles. And next week, my esteemed superior, Johannes Peterser, is going to talk about the usability aspects of the geodata management principles. So what is DAMES SDR? DAMES SDR is a web service that is available to everyone under the address dimes.org. It is a site and dataset registry for in situ sites. It allows to document environmental and monitoring and research in situ sites. I have included a little example on the right-hand side, an in situ site that's located in Austria and maintained by my organization, the Environment Agency Austria. We have at the moment around 1,200 in situ sites registered on DIMES. The map that you can see on the right-hand side illustrates that. As you can see, the majority of the sites are located in Europe, but not exclusively. So we actually do feature a substantial amount of sites that are in South America, North America, East Asia, South Africa, Australia. DIMES is being actively used in the research networks ELTA and ILTA, as well as a number of EU projects such as eShape. DIMES is a component of the ELTA information management system, so it serves data in general and geodata in particular to the other services in the network. Once you register a site on DIMES, DIMES will do a number of things. It will issue a persistent identifier for sites called the DIMES ID, so it's a persistent, unique, resolvable ID. It provides in general information about the observed properties, geographic extent, contact details, environmental characteristics, projects a site takes part in, and so on and so forth. So what that looks like, you can see also again on the right-hand side, which is still that Austrian site maintained by my organization. And all of that information is available through machine-readable endpoints. And it is licensed as open data. So it's licensed under CC BY and C4.0 international. If you are interested in the exact terms of use, you can go to the URL that I've included in the presentation. The short summary is that it's free to use as long as it's not used commercially and as long as credit is given. If you say that you took the data from DIMES, that's credit enough from my point of view. So I have again included a slide that is just briefly rehashing what the geodata management principle of accessibility is. And that basically means that data should be accessible via online services, preferably user customizable services with visualization and computation. And that's exactly what we did with DIMES. So what we have is we have geodata services that allow to provide the geodata available for particular in situ sites using WFS and WMS services. What that looks like, you can see again on the right-hand side where I've included a few screenshots. Feel free to visit those links and have a look at it yourself. You can export that geodata in basically every common geodata format, such as shapefiles, KML, GML, GRACE, and so on and so forth. And you can use it as input data for scripts, desktop GIS, whatever. We also have a REST API that's a little more comprehensive than the geodata services, because the geodata services, they focus on geodata, while the REST API just exposes all the information that we have on DIMES. Every single bit, like as soon as we store some information on DIMES, it's available for the REST API. And that again can be used for scripts, external applications, and so on and so forth. If you're interested in that and details on how to use that and the different things that you can do with it, there's a dedicated page about that in our documentation. And what we've done also, after we've received quite some feedback from our ELTA user community, is that we try to make it easier, because if you have a background in environmental sciences, it's easy to use geodata. If you have experience with coding and web development, it's easy to use REST API. But if you don't have that, then maybe you're more comfortable with using Python packages or R packages. So what we did is we wrote and published a dedicated Python package whose sole purpose is to ease the access to DIMES data. Like I said, it's published on PyPy, so it's very easy to install. So all you have to do when you have a Python environment, you just type in pip install DIMES and you get the DIMES package right away. And you can just, or you can already start working with DIMES data. And then there's another package that's for R. It's called RELTA, so it's the R package for ELTA. It's a little more comprehensive than the DIMES package, so it features a lot of the functionalities that we have in the DIMES Python package, but additional ones as well. so that we can make life a little easier for the ELTA community. And that's it. This already leads to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Christoph. I think you have mentioned a lot of the GEO principles, from the sharing with the licensees to the preservation with the ideas, and to the access with the access to the data with the APIs, but also access to the packages, as Gilberto was mentioning, with the access via R and Jupyter to have directly visualization, as it is mentioned into the principle. So I think you have covered a lot of things. Any reaction or question to Christoph?
Yes, there's a raise of hand.
Yes, Joan?
Can I just ask, you know, if I'm interested in biodiversity, I go to DEMS, I can find which are the sites in my area that eventually could have data that interests me, but how I will then ask for the data? Because if I understood correctly, the DEMS is just giving me the site description and some metadata about the site. But what about the, you know, the actual studies that have been done there and the data sets linked to that site?
There are a few facets to this question. First of all, we do have some data in DIMES, but it's I think in most cases it won't be sufficient. If you are talking about ELTA sites, we are about to release a data repository that features ELTA data, and it's linked to DIMES. So what you would do is you go on DIMES, you look for your sites, and if it's an ELTA site, you just, you know, you click on it and it takes you to the data that's available for this particular ELTA site. And then we disseminate DIMES in general. We try to make it a more commonly known tool in the environmental domain in general, and try to have links where we connect the site documentation with the actual measured data. Depending on the research network and the projects that we're in, sometimes this link is stronger and it's easier to get the data. And sometimes we don't have this link at all, and you have to contact the site managers. I mean, by email, like literally call them and ask them for data.
Yeah, and that's precisely the hidden treasure that I was intrigued about that. No, we have, sometimes we know that might be data, we know that you know, we have the resources there, but still the treasure is hidden and maybe undocumented. So this final step, how we are going to avoid this final step that is not just in your area, it's in many areas.
I mean, I suppose it's you know, just infrastructure building, EU projects, EU infrastructure development that will eventually amount to more systems where more data is just readily available and linked. And when you go on DIMES, like the way I envision it, at some point in the future, you go on DIMES and you say, oh yeah, give me all the biodiversity data. And then you click on the site record and it's connected to a number of data repositories. And it will say something like, for this site, there are, I don't know, 2,000 data sets available covering biodiversity and biogeochemistry and whatever. And then you just click on it and it takes you to those places that have the data. But I mean, obviously, we don't have that at the moment. We are working on it, but it's not there yet.
Bente?
Yeah, just a question to make me understand. So you have built sort of a pathway, a pipeline to access the data if they are accessible.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah, we
So
can do that.
it's ready. It's ready there. So if
I'd say the conceptual work is done.
Yeah.
Partially it's implemented in very particular use cases. And you could roll it out given that you have the personnel to do it.
Yeah.
But that's a very big if.
Yeah, but you have demonstrated, you have described how it can be done, and you have examples to illustrate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, I will share the results of the poll that look like the previous one, but the previous one was more for remote sensing. And here we talk about in situ. And what we see is that we still have a lot of users building their own database because, as said before, the in situ is far more fragmented. And very often the data is collected and gathered into collections as you do for the sites of ELTER, based on scenarios, based on issues you want to address. And it can be complicated to reuse for different type of scenarios. And this is why people are often driven to build their own database or access to the data. And this is why in situ is not just an extension. In situ management is not just an extension to remote sensing management. It's completely different. And this is very important to understand to the community because we can try to have a generalist platform that serve satellite data. It's more difficult, I think, to do for in situ. And this is why it's important to brainstorm on that and understand that.
Marie-Françoise, I want to expand on that building my own database response. We see there are people in the audience who actually do that. And it would be, you're right about the in situ that has, requires special care. But I have the impression that not only are they building their own database for in situ data, but sometimes also for remote sensing data and combinations of it. So it would be interesting to hear somebody, if you would mind, somebody with examples of building your own database, if you are both building it for in situ and remote sensing, or only for in situ.
Any volunteer in the audience who has answered that to the poll? To answer Ben's remark? No, I don't see any hand raised. Okay, well, any of these questions, in fact, could be the topic for works. So I think it's difficult to go towards to really be exhaustive on these topics in one session of 1 hour and a half. I would like to give the floor to James Ratling, who, after talking about the FAIR and the GEO principles, which are not in contradiction, I think we can market the GEO principles under the FAIR umbrella. This is not a problem, but the CARE principles are bringing a completely different approach and ambition. So I would like to give the floor to James. Apologies, I have to introduce James, so I let you introduce yourself with the slide. So James Ratling is is coordinator for Climate Partnership for Great Lakes Tribal Water Alliance and principal, Ratling Leaf Consulting LLC in Black Oak, South Dakota. He's a member of South Dakota Rosebud Sioux Tribe, and James has served as visiting collaborator, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. You can see he has a long experience with geoscience and Earth observation data, and this specific context of traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous approach to the data. James, I give you the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Marie. And again, I want to extend my appreciation and gratefulness for the opportunity to be with you today, and also, just to approach and discuss and have dialogue with these important topics around data. So, as I understand it, my time with you today is to really speak on this idea of CARE, the CARE principles, and as an Indigenous person, if you see on my name, I'm also a co-founder of the Geo Indigenous Alliance. So 2 years ago, at the Ministerial Summit, where I got to meet Gilberto and others on this call here today, I had the opportunity to really put together a growing and emerging alliance of Indigenous leaders to really work with geodata, science, and technology through the lens and through the application of Indigenous peoples in our in our visions of how we can apply the data for important efforts in our world. So the CARE principles, I believe, is important because if you understand and work with Indigenous communities, you know that Indigenous data sovereignty, well, I'll introduce a new word if you don't know already, Indigenous data sovereignty is becoming increasingly a relevant topic. And I know that when we talk about Indigenous people, we have to really think about and focus our attention on the protection of Indigenous rights and interests, in particular data governance. As you know, there's more than 370 million Indigenous people around the world, representing 5,000 different cultures across 90 countries. And so Indigenous,
James,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. Do you share screens or do you have slides or?
No, I'm just doing it.
Okay, just checking.
I'm doing it old school.
Okay, okay, thank you, sorry.
That's okay. So again, as I mentioned, this idea of Indigenous data sovereignty is important as we think about the CARE principles, because we're talking about getting Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights as it deals with research ethics. And also I want to bring in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. So with most Indigenous data is held within non-Indigenous institutions and government agencies. And so for opportunities for increasing control are directly connected to identifying properly, identifying Indigenous data and making Indigenous data fair principles, making those critical to afford greater Indigenous participation in data governance activities. There's a broad range of data-related challenges exist for Indigenous people. Every Indigenous community has an enormous collection of tangible and intangible cultural material, knowledge, and data held in archives, museums, libraries, repositories, and other online databases. Significant information about these collections include individual and community names, and proper provenance information is missing. So Indigenous people and communities are largely not the legal right holders of these materials. So we have issues of responsibility and ownership, as well as incomplete and significant mistakes in the metadata, continuing into the digital lives of these materials. Now, there are more and more researchers collecting data and samples from Indigenous people more than ever. And there needs to be a renewed need and promote the rights and interests of Indigenous people in relation to their data. So to address this, the CARE principles, again, were developed by the Research Data Alliance, International Indigenous Data Sovereignty Interest Group. And they aim to empower Indigenous people by shifting the focus of data governance from consultation to values-based relationships that promote equitable Indigenous participation in processes of data reuse, which will result in more equitable outcomes, as well as preserving the relationship built on trust and respect. So these principles, again, are the collective benefit. The C is collective benefit, the A is authority to control, R is responsibility and ethics. Again, these principles were developed by Indigenous scholars and allies and researchers and practitioners, really to support the innovation, governance, and self-determination among Indigenous people, nations, and communities. So the design of an action within the Indigenous data sovereignty movement itself centers on leadership by Indigenous people. So that's why I find myself today with you today, just to make sure that as GEO goes forward with its data management principles and how it all shapes out in the future, that there are Indigenous people that are working and continue to work on these principles. And as Gilberto, I think, rightly said it, there has to be an opportunity and a new framework, if you will, really to bring in Indigenous people and through the CARE principle. So these are, again, we believe that as I wrap up here my time, we think that CARE and FAIR can complement each other. We believe in inclusive development, innovation. We believe in improved governance and citizen engagement. Again, equitable outcomes are important. As we increasingly work with Indigenous people, we have to recognize our rights and our interest. We want positive relationships. We continue to build and expand our own capacity and capability to work with data for our own needs. Let's not forget our Indigenous languages and worldviews as climate change and these other worldwide efforts impact our people. Again, we want to minimize harm and maximize benefit. And so I'll bring the word injustice, the word justice, social justice, environmental justice, and Indigenous justice. They're all important for us as we consider these CARE principles. And finally, I would say for the future. We know that we have to work together. We have to continue to build our development capacity. And I think that as we go forward in these kind of contexts, through the GEO platform, we're creating our awareness of the CARE principles in action. We want to operationalize FAIR and CARE. Again, we want to continue to protect and support Indigenous data sovereignty. Again, this is for the greater value of creating more opportunity and value with Indigenous people going forward. So I'll stop there with my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I have launched the poll while you were talking, asking if people knew about the principles. I'm sharing the results. Just tell me if you all see the results.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So the question was, do you know the CARE principles? Yes, I use and implement them. Yes, but I have only heard about them. And no, 35%, 61% have heard about them, and 4%, one person in fact, is using and implementing them. So, well, first of all, thank you very much, James, because the idea is to raise the awareness, and we can see that this is very needed, as just knowing, having heard about something, it's not knowing it, it's not being ready to implement it. So meaning that it is really important to raise the awareness, and it's important to have you as a leader on this topic here. So thank you very much for being available. And then there is one person who said that he's using and implementing them. And I think it would be very interesting to have some success story on that. Does the person who answered that volunteer to talk and speak about how he's using and implementing them? Bent, I see your hand, but I don't think you are.
No, it's not me.
Implementing them? Okay.
No.
Okay, so, well, Bent, you have raised the hand. I will give you the floor. And if someone wants to bring a success story about that, we will be very interesting now or in the future dialogue.
Yes, yes, please don't be shy. We call this a dialogue series on purpose. So we really want to hear you. James, thank you so much for bringing the attention to CARE and informing more about it for this community. And you said it, you said FAIR and CARE could be complementing each other, but that actually goes also with GEO. I wanted to ask you, and not to reduce the CARE principles, but when you said languages, of course, the Indigenous people have many different languages, and there's a richness of information in those languages. And I happen to know, because I'm from Norway, I know the word for snow is much richer in the colder regions of the world where they have snow, for instance. So in the languages, we have been talking about that in GEO also, that we need to have to make the data interoperable. We need to take into account the different languages around the world. So would that be a theme for discussion or development, to also include languages from the Indigenous people in GEO context?
Well, Bente, that's a great question and a great thought. I think, again, for our audience today, the United Nations declared the decade of Indigenous languages, beginning, I think, in 2022. So I would say that the answer is yes. I think that, when we talk about issues like climate change, things that are really important and relevant to Indigenous people, because it's impacting us now, I think as GEO begins to wrestle, where it's going in terms of how it interacts with Indigenous people, I do think there has to be a relevance to it. And I think that as we go forward, we're looking here at ourselves here in America within the Lakota people, my tribe. We're looking at artificial intelligence and other technologies, really, to how do how do we transfer that language to our community? How do we transfer it to our young people who are very interested in technology, who are very interested in science? So I think as we think about this strategy of really supporting the decade of indigenous languages and GEO working alongside UN and all those other groups that promote this, I think that's the right way, and that's an appropriate way. I think we know that within the indigenous languages, there's knowledge. There's a traditional knowledge within those languages. And when those languages go away, we lose something, the world loses something, we lose something as indigenous people. So I think this is a moment in time when we can come together and find that common mechanism, that common platform to support indigenous peoples. And one way we can do that is supporting and acknowledging and bringing awareness to the importance of indigenous languages.
So just to add it to the access point, so it means that if we have this translation of languages, it makes access to data and information both ways easier. That was the link for today.
Well, Gilberto has emphasized at the start that talking about data, that the principles was too much focusing on data, because now we talk more and more about processes, open source, and so on. And last year, GEO has made a statement about open knowledge. And it's nice that, James, you bring the knowledge in. And I fully agree with Gilberto that the principles, because of historical reasons, are very much talking and focusing on data, when in fact, we can see that behind the data, there are information, visualization, processes, and knowledge. And this knowledge comes from all the communities, everyone. So this is important. I mean, the access, the notion of access has to be deepened in many directions. I fully agree with you. And this perfectly makes the link, I think, with Gilberto remarks at the start. There is some comment here, Joanne. As we progress to global work, I'm reading a comment from Joanne into the chat. Keeping other languages alive is more and more difficult.
Being a Catalan speaker, I really sympathize with this idea of preserving local languages, but at the same time, I know how difficult it is. In particular, even in Inspire, where we have powerful languages in play, like German and French and so on, it has been super complicated to actually keep data in more than one language. And actually, I believe we have failed on that. And if you go to the Inspire catalog, you will rarely see metadata translated, rarely. So imagine to try to extend that to more minoritarian languages.
And I think that all the people here around the table are speaking several languages, and we perfectly know that a language is not just a language, it's not just translation. This is a culture, it's concepts, it's words that you cannot translate sometimes. As Benta said, they have much more vocabularies for snow in the north, because it's part of the culture and it's part of their experience. And I'm sure that this is the case for all the languages of each of us around the table. So we know that when we talk about translation, it's not just translation. Language is far more than translation. Mm-hmm. So, well, and we know that this is super complicated. And so because when we have to translate and we have to think into another language, we know how we have to tweak our thinking and to train before getting the same agility in another language. So this is a very interesting topic.
Yeah, that's precisely the risk. I mean, the global culture tends to erase all these differences. And that's why the care principles are needed, of course.
Yeah. It's, well, thank you, James, for bringing that with the indigenous background, but we are all indigenous here compared to the British language. So, so we completely understand what you're meaning. Any other remark around the table? Well, I understand. Yeah, Bento?
Yeah, I just, maybe this is a little bit touchy, but I know that the ownership of the data is important to indigenous people, not to only to indigenous people, but that's been one of the issues in certain communities, at least. What are you thinking about this in terms of ownership of the knowledge and the data in indigenous communities today, James?
Well, that's a great question. I know, at least speaking from my own tribe here in America, I know, we've taken steps really to better understand the complexities again of the legal, the social, the cultural aspects of data or information about ourselves. I think in many ways, in our experience here as Lakota people, and we're a global people as well. I mean, people know who we are. But as we move into data governance and data sovereignty and data self-determination, I still think that we need more of our young people really to step into these roles. If they are more attuned, more prepared, and more understanding the science, the technology of the data, I think that's helpful. But also, I think that we're still going through a lot of transition, if you will, in our cultures. Meaning that we're still trying to understand what happened to us. And as you know, across this country, across the world, where there's a lot of these things called trauma, intergenerational trauma. And I bring that up because it's important to understand that it's just not the issue of data itself, but it's really understanding who we are as indigenous people. And there's this whole decolonization movement happening as well around the world. So we find ourselves at a crossroads, at an intersection between the past, the present, and the future. And for me, as I think about it, I know that we have to work together. I know that all the studies, the research says that in order to address these global sustainable development goals, these big goals that we have, indigenous people have an important role to play. And I think that with those kind of big goals, big visions, there has to be a better way of governance, better way of equity and equality, a better way of creating opportunities again for all people. And so the Geo-Indigenous Alliance, which is one of the things I do, we stand for those big issues. We stand for those important principles, and we are seeking to operationalize all these principles as well, day in and day out. We understand again that as we go forward, I'm being reminded by our elders, another data set, another knowledge, that another opportunity again to understand again what's happening. So I think these questions are really good. And I would always remind ourselves again that, that our place at the table, it matters. And if we have to create a whole new table, then let's create a whole new table where indigenous voices are heard, they're respected, and opportunities for all of us to go forward. So that would be my response.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's very, very inspirational. I have so many ideas that go into all the direction about these administrative layers that we have that constrain people, that each of us has a different traceability in the past, in culture and so on. Well, it moves a lot of, it was the idea of these dialogues is to stimulate brainstorming. It works perfectly for me. I hope it works for you all. So I have to, I think we have to wrap up because it's almost the time. We did not cover all the aspects of accessibility here, online access. I say again, we did not cover security. We did not cover federations, which is behind the idea again that Gilberto has mentioned about the applications and so on. But we have tried to highlight different topics, to invite different speakers bringing their own experience. I hope you have appreciated that, and that this has pushed the brainstorming to go further and move, because the progress is in the move also. This is the only constant, is that everything is moving. We have to also move with the environment, with the technologies, the organizations, and I hope that these dialogues will contribute to that. Thank you again to all the speakers. Thank you to the audience, but I would like to ask you to turn on your cameras so that Bente can capture a photo, a snapshot for the communication. Thank you to have stayed 28 participants until the end. Paola, Eugenio, Diego, Christopher, Luisa, we are waiting for you.
Don't be shy. We are a big community.
Now we know who are the shy ones. Okay.
Yes. Those who
Bente,
didn't answer the questions.
I think you can go then.
Yes. Yes. I've taken, we got Diego. Yeah, smile again, folks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Hope to see you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Goodbye.
Same time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.